towards the fact that they are being, killed, and so they are kind of. So we're seeing a very high population growth rate these days among Palestinians.
Yes.
So democratically speaking, they will, even in democracy, they will, force their own preferences.
Right.
If it's still about Arabs and Israelis or about Jews and Muslims.
Right.
So perhaps, that's something, perhaps there should be a third term which transcends, which says neither this nor that, neither that or this,
Right.
but something else.
Well,
But then what can that something else be? It's
right.
difficult to say.
Well, it's interesting. As I study it, there are actually several different points of views within both Arab and specifically Palestinian political communities on this issue. So we probably have to be careful about what sentences with the Arabs feel or Jews feel or whatever. We don't really know. But Anand Ashrawi, who actually works for the Palestinian Authority, used to actually teach English at the University of Virginia. She was a Trustarian and she left to go back to join the Palestinian Authority. She's a pacifist. She's a nonviolent. She worries that a one-state solution would be exactly what they have right now. In other words, there's one state, it's called Israel, and everything else would become like the Binationalism of South Africa.
Yeah.
Kind of occupied or subordinated zones within this one country. So a one-state solution on principle of hierarchy is indeed exactly what's already in place. So it doesn't make sense to argue for it, she says. However, the people who do argue for a one-state solution, and they have become fewer and fewer on both sides, which I actually find very sad, make clear that it would have to be a solution that was structured on principles of equality that could not guarantee demographic advantage for Jews. Because the whole point is that whoever is inhabiting the land is part of the state, right? In whatever complexity that is. And it's on this point that even the left Israelis, not all, but a lot of left Israelis stop. So giving up the idea of demographic advantage. They think that that's the end of the Jewish state. Now, of course, Adi Ophir argues that no, you can still have Jewish modes of belonging, you can have strong cultural and social organizations, you just can't have a state apparatus that's based on religion. But it doesn't really work. Similarly, what you do in Palestine right now, of course, the differences between various factions there sometimes also rely on religion. Hamas has made itself into a religious party. If Hamas is democratically elected, and if indeed it turns out that a majority want a religious character to the state, what do we do about self-determination? Right. So it's a problem. I understand, and of course we have an odd problem, because you would think, okay, well, what if it's just a state like any other, where there are many religions and many ethnicities and many people with many backgrounds? Why can't it just enter the 21st century and be multicultural or heterogeneous like the rest of us? And what's interesting is that even the principle of the separation of religion and state, which goes back to Montesquieu, is sometimes understood as a genocidal principle. And we have to think about what kind of politics is this in which to call for a state on radically traditional liberal principles is actually considered to be a nearly genocidal thing to do, or collaboration with the Nazis, or intrinsically anti-Semitic, rather than trying to find a framework in which inclusiveness might work. it's a hard one. It's a hard one. I mean, what's I think interesting to think about maybe now practically is how binationalism might work with a two-state solution and what kinds of relations of mutual recognition and equality could be established on that basis. It's very hard to imagine it. But I want to say this about things being impossible to imagine or difficult to imagine. I think it's important that Lars Kropotkin says, look, of course, everybody says binationalism is impossible, why are we even talking about it? But what would the world look like if no one believed in that impossible ideal? Would we like that world? Would we want to live in that world? I'm not sure. What if no one held out for any possibility of cohabitation or mutual recognition or some such thing? Would that be okay to live in that world? I don't know. It seems like we need certain ideals to be continually articulated and debated, if only to produce a critical perspective on the present situation, which is, I think, his position.
Do you think it's possible to have bi-nationalism without universalism?
Without universalism?
Yeah.
Yes, you could. You could have two nations self-determining. So you could have it really based on the nation rather than on universalism. Or you could have it based on universal principles, at which point binationalism would imply the deconstruction of the nation. I'm not going to get that far. Yes, please.
What was the year that this was written?
Lars Kropotkin, 99. This was part of a large conference in Jerusalem, the first time Hamas were been discussed in Israel. And indeed, Origins of Totalitarianism is just coming out this fall. Yeah.
Like 2 weeks ago, I was at a club, and it was a 2-room place. And I found it really interesting because it seemed like there was this, that it served this great purpose to provide 2 options. Because there was sort of this there's a very distinct, process of it was different spaces, sort of like they both started out the same, and it was like you walk in the door, you go left or right. But over the span of, a few hours, they developed very distinct personalities, and it seems to be kind of just an aspect, perhaps, of humanity, that it's appropriate to provide different spaces, that the boundaries are more beneficial than not in certain situations. And so, because there is a logistical side to it, even with, if you're taking Islam and Judaism, there's different schedules of how people live their lives according to that, the way of life. There's people that, it's like the apparatus and the schedule defines certain things. So I don't know how it would be administered, and how that becomes, but the melting pot thing seems like it's
not quite practical.
Yeah.
Not quite feasible. Well, but let's remember this, that a good 20% of the Israeli population is already Palestinian.
Right.
And the question is, well, are they citizens or what? It's like, well, they have nominal citizenship, but they don't have full rights. They don't have full rights of mobility, they don't have full rights to property, they don't have equal rights to employment. Because in order to have, mobility is restricted by law, and it's becoming ever more restricted. And employment and housing is very often dependent on having successfully gone through the army. And if you're Palestinian, you're not allowed to be in the army. So there is already this mixing, and indeed they're Arab Jews, right? The Mizrahim. So it's not really like we have 2 radically different people. In fact, the whole problem of intermarriage has become really, really a problem of the wall, because Palestinians and Israelis who are involved with one another or who are married to one another are having a difficult time actually getting to each other's families. And those rights have been suspended, especially in the last years. So, it's not exactly like 2 separate people.
Well, no, it's not what I was sort of...
No, I know, but I'm actually sort of I'm just saying of course, there is enormous separateness as well. But maybe that in-between area, the threshold before you've gone into either door, or, I don't know.
It just seems like it makes architecture, like that place, the way that you do go in between those spaces,
Yes.
very important.
Oh, it
aspect
is.
of it.
And in fact, there's another person who works on architecture, who actually understands the whole problem as an architectural problem. Okay, he's brilliant. And his name is A.L. Weitzman. And I remember names better than titles, I'm sorry, but you can look him up. And it's one of the best books